Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Welcome to Sci-Fi Saturday. Today we're reading a story appropriate for the season, called Hannah of the Fields by Carey Curtis Smith. Papa was a handsome man, but he never remarried. After Mama was buried beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn, Papa focused his passions on our farm. With magic hands tanned the color of red earth, he coaxed the vines and crops from the fields. The house was tall and lean, and its whitewashed sideboards gleamed amidst his harvest of golden corn. But of all the recollections and faded memories I have of those early years in Oklahoma, I remember most our Hannah. Hannah stood high in the center of the cornfield and surveyed our golden crop. She warded off the black crows and embraced the autumnal winds. She was born of cottonwood twigs, straw, burlap, and Mama's old broom. Some thought it peculiar that we chose an old gingham dress and bonnet that once belonged to Mama to cover Hannah's wooden skeleton, but the effect was haunting. Hannah, named for a runaway who helped deliver me, stood tall in the field gazing over the husks and ears towards the house. At times, when the wind blew just so and the sun cast long purple shadows across the farmlands, it seemed as if our Hannah were actually waving at us or someone else not seen by us. Sometimes she gave the impression of a woman crying, lost in a tall green field, crying a helpless, silent sound. Only the wind and the rustling of corn, like tumultuous applause, could be heard, and many a night I pressed close to my window glass, straining to hear her nocturnal plea. Papa never spoke of Hannah directly, but would dutifully change her garments according to the season. In winter, she wore black with a deep blue shawl and bonnet, while in spring, she wore green with a vivid yellow taffeta sash. In summer, it was red calico, and in fall, plum, deep and rich, with a bodice of cream-colored lace. Oftentimes, Papa would stare high into the baking noonday sun, and then leave me alone by the house, only to return with a parasol or a Japanese fan for Hannah. I followed him many times to that magic place in the center of the field. We waded through forests of scratching, rustling cornstalks, which opened onto a clearing of packed loam. The air was devoid of corn, but a profusion of pumpkins and vines littered the ground. At the center stood Hannah, and it always seemed as if suddenly bashful of Papa's handsome face and gray eyes, she would turn her burlap and button face downward, and her fan, held in stick fingers, fluttered in the breeze. Many of the neighboring farmers' wives gossiped over clotheslines about Papa's eccentricity, and further rumors commenced when Papa emptied 2 rounds of buckshot into the breeches of the Thatcher boys as they attempted to steal poor Hannah from her lofty perch. Needless to say, all of this commotion over a scarecrow became the seeds of what were later to blossom into a variety of wild, superstitious stories to be told at hearthside to wide-eyed children. Still, after years of observing and putting aside odd occurrences as coincidence unexplainable, Papa had grown more stoic and distant as the years went by, and our relationship more strained. I often wished he would remarry in order that I might have another soul to converse with. I often voiced these concerns to Mama. I'd kneel beside her modest grave, clear away the leaves, and deposit a handful of cornflower blossoms on the spot. The tall cottonwoods above would sway and whisper quietly to me. This was my only communion with the mother I never knew. and I often wished to feel the soft touch of her gentle hands or hear the music in her laughter. I knew, for Black Hannah told me, that in many ways I was like Mama, and perhaps this explained Papa's increasing silence and distance. Black Hannah, she had no other name, was a runaway headed north to Canada when she stumbled onto our farm. Mama and Papa did not share the southern sympathies regarding runaways, and thus Hannah became a closely guarded secret. She lived in the barn and remained unknown until the howling October night when I was born. That night, Mama's life was carried away with the autumn leaves, and mine began. It was Hannah who cradled me in ebony hands, while Papa buried his face and wept into Mama's dark hair. 3 years later, Hannah had been secreted into northern safety. Papa decided to make a scarecrow which I endowed with a loving appellation, Hannah of the Fields, in memory of the only mother I had known. Beyond our house and bordering the long dirt road to our farm ran a row of cottonwoods. Like giant leafy sentinels, they acted as a barrier to prevent the winds from carrying off precious topsoil from this world. At night you could hear their mournful cries in the high branches. As a small child, I often wished that Mama's soul had been trapped that October night and might be shaken down, but I was always too frightened to climb into those haunted branches. One night, not long before the harvest, I was awakened by what I thought to be a cobweb across my face. It startled me to be sitting upright in the darkness of my attic room. Only the orange moon cast its light upon my window, and then I heard, quite clearly, my name. It was whispered and seemed to come from all directions. It was whispered again, and ever so faintly I smelled cornflour mixed with fragrances of harvest. I crept softly toward my window and gazed down upon the endless acres of waving corn which rippled golden in the moon's glow. There stood Papa, eyes staring upward at Hannah, and her skirts rustling in the wind. Slowly Papa reached upward and touched the stick fingers. The wind blew and the cloud shadows danced across the moon, and yet it seemed that for a brief moment I beheld two lovers in their embrace. But as the clouds moved on and leaves quietly deposited themselves on the porch, only Hannah the Scarecrow remained. In the distance I could make out Papa's tall, slim silhouette walking towards the barn. A lantern attached to the barn door swung crazily in the wind. Papa stood for a moment in its light, and even at that distance I could see that his piercing gray eyes were wet with tears. He disappeared inside, and seconds later a shot rang out clear. I bolted from my room, choking in horror and fear. A sickness washed over me as I ran for the cornfield and the barn beyond. I stumbled, tasting dirt, and tangling in pumpkin creepers, struggled to break free and ran on again. I reached the clearing and stopped. Hannah was dancing. Under the round October moon, she spun. In moon shadows, her gingham skirts swept the dust and rustled amid the swaying cornstalks. The corn rows bowed like lanky schoolboys, hoping to have the next waltz. How they would bow low in the winds! But Hannah paid them no mind. She whirled past, leaving only darkness, dust, and the smell of harvest perfumes. All the fields sighed in the night winds, and the moon shone red, red as the blood sprayed on the barn door. As Hannah danced, Mama's sister had taken me in after that October night, and I was to leave forever the Oklahoma farm with its rows of waving corn and centuries of cottonwoods ensnared with lost souls. I returned only once in my adulthood to see the old homestead and note the modern improvements. What struck me as odd was that Hannah remained fluttering in her bonnet at the center of the cornfield. Perhaps the new owners enjoyed the air of mystery and folklore that surrounded her. Beside her swayed another scarecrow in farmer's overalls, much like the ones my papa once wore. A straw hat was cocked to one side of its burlap face with gray button eyes. And when the wind blew just so, and the long purple shadows of the setting sun stretched across the fields, it appeared as if stick fingers intertwined, and as the corn bowed in the wind, Hannah and her gray-eyed partner danced.